Hi, everyone, and most of you, hi again. It's so lovely to spend another evening with you. Thank you so much for coming back 2 nights in a row. You probably didn't want to see me twice in a row, but even my own son doesn't want to see me 2 nights in a row. But thank you very, very much for coming back. Apologies again for the technical difficulties last night. You'll be happy to know they are all resolved now. With a little extra help from Eva's lovely granddaughter, Lisa. So thank you for the help in the background there, Lisa. Before we get started, I talked quite a lot about our charity last night. I did have a follow-up call today from someone asking, so what happens to the children? We do all of this work, we raise money for the young people in Israel who have had very difficult beginnings. What happens to them? So I wanted to share just a little bit about that. So the very vast majority, meaning well over 90% of our graduates go on to do military service or national service in Israel, which is way above the national average, which is amazing. They do really well in the army, and then they go on and again, the vast majority have stable employment and are able to support their families. They are able to have healthy relationships and become parents themselves. We're truly breaking the cycles of poverty and abuse and challenging home lives, because we have taught them how to be nurtured and how to be taken care of. And through that, we teach them how to care for others. And many of them also learn to take care of others by, well, they all volunteer. So they go out into the community while they are in our youth villages. They go out into their own communities and volunteer. It's one of the pillars of the way that our children are cared for and raised, is that they come in feeling that they have nothing to give. We teach them that they have something to give, and also it's their personal responsibility to give. So they volunteer in their communities, whether it's in nursery schools, schools for children with autism, animal shelters, senior living facilities, old age homes in Israel, all sorts of places, immigrant absorption centers, and they do a lot of different volunteering work. They pack parcels of food for every holiday, and they bring them to families in need, which is remarkable because most of them came from families who would have been the recipients of those parcels. And 75% of our graduates continue to volunteer as adults, which again is far higher than the general population. It's something I'm particularly proud of and impressed by. They have a sense of responsibility for others, which is something I can only hope our own children will take on as well. They are earning higher than average incomes. They are in positions of employment that are, again, above average. We have graduates who, run their own businesses. We have mechanics and hairdressers and so on. We also have doctors and lawyers. One of our graduates, actually from Yamin Ord, was the very first Ethiopian lawyer in Israel. We have a member of the Knesset, an Ethiopian man who was the first Ethiopian member of Knesset. We have social workers and teachers. Many of them want to give back what the support and help that they've received. Basically, they are doing incredible things, and we're very, very proud of them. The children that come to us are highly, highly likely, 70% likely, to be dependent on welfare for life based on where they come from, but our graduates are almost universally not. They are providing support to others. So that's what happens to our graduates. They're incredible people. We're very, very proud of them, and I feel very lucky to be able to play a role in allowing them to get to that point. They do all the hard work, that is for sure. Right, So that's what we do. Thank you to everyone who's worked behind the scenes to get us to this tonight. With no further ado, I'm going to welcome Morris Selwyn back to our screens. Those of you who were with us last night remember Morris. It was very, very challenging for us both because we had our outfits planned and then we suddenly had to get different outfits for the next night, couldn't show up in the same thing. So Morris, well done. I'm going to leave you in Morris's capable hands and I will come back at the end. Before I go, a couple of quick bits of housekeeping, let you know that we cannot see you, so you don't have to worry about what your camera's doing or, you can talk, we can't hear you. But do know that we are recording. There will be a question and answer session at the end of Morris and Eva's conversation. The way that you can contribute to that, if you want to, is if you look at your screen, it's either already there or you need to hover your mouse or your finger, depending on what kind of device you're on. And you'll see a box at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A. You tap on that and you can type your question in. You can feel free to have your name in the question. You can also feel free to ask it anonymously. Bear in mind that I will be reading those questions out to Eva. And I will say your name and we will be recording and it will be online. So if you don't want your name to be part of it, that's absolutely fine. Just choose to be anonymous. But you can type those questions in at any time, but I will ask them at the end when I come back on the screen. Is there anything else, Morris?
No, let's kick off.
Okay, off you go. Thank you.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and it's an absolute pleasure and delight to be with you once more. Thank you for the introduction, Dahlia. Well, tonight, our guest is a remarkable lady who I've had the honor of meeting and photographing many times over the years. And we're privileged to hear this evening how she went from living a normal, happy life, family life, to surviving the horrors of the Holocaust, to rebuilding her life and dedicating her time to Holocaust education, which is something I feel very, very important for society. Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome to your screens, Dr. Eva Schloss MBE. Hello, Eva. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, particularly in the month of Holocaust Memorial Day, when I know how very much in demand you are. So I'm going to ask you right from the very beginning. You were born in Vienna in 1929. Tell us about your family and your life as a young girl before war broke out.
Well, thank you, boys. When I talk about this, I get a big smile on my face because I had a very, very happy youth with my family. I had very young parents. My mother and my father got married very young. My mother was 18, my father 21, and I was the second child. I had an older brother. We had a big house, and my father was one of the first people who bought a little car, and he was a very sporty man. We went around. Austria is a beautiful country with lakes and mountains, and I grew up in between all these beautiful sceneries and with grandparents, aunts, uncles. In winter, we went, when I was 3, I went already on skis, and in the summer, my father threw me in the water and caught me, and I learned swimming already at a very, I just loved all this. My brother was much more careful about it, but I will tell about him a bit later. But it was idyllic. But of course, unfortunately, it didn't last very long.
Well, in respect of that, in 1938, German troops marched into Austria. Now, I know life had become increasingly grim for you and your family. Please tell us what plans your father had made for your family to leave Austria.
Well, I mean, the adults, I think, had expected something like this might happen. Of course, you know, there was no television, so you didn't really see any news. We had a little bakelite radio, and the evening when we were in bed, to listen to the news, what had happened in Germany at the time, because in Germany, the hate and the anti-Semitism against the Jewish people had already started in 1935, actually, already, as soon as Hitler came to power. So my father actually left immediately. He had inherited a shoe factory from his father, and he had business contact in Holland. In the south of Holland, there was a big industry in shoes. So he went there, and
Hi,
he said,
everyone,
as soon
and
as
most
I'm
of you, hi
settled, I
again.
will
It's so lovely to
ask
spend
for you
another
to
evening
come.
with you.
But unfortunately, of course,
Thank you so much.
the borders were closed. Nobody really wanted. It's in 1938, there were already a lot of German refugees in different countries, and most countries didn't really want any more refugees. That reminds us, unfortunately, on what is happening now as well.
Well, fortunately, you did manage to get to Amsterdam. Now, what was that like for you when you first got there?
Amsterdam was actually quite different. The people were very welcoming. I made friends immediately. They all wanted to know how it is to live in a country with mountains, because Holland is very flat. And yeah, I settled down quite well there. And I just tell a little thing which you had asked. We had been before already in Belgium, because Holland didn't want us at first. So I could speak a little bit of Dutch, because in Belgium you learn another two languages, French and Flemish, which is very much like Dutch. So I knew a bit. I wasn't completely lost. So and I became quite popular because I was very good in sport. I got a bicycle and Wellington boots, and I was blonde and blue-eyed, and people said, "You look like a real Dutch girl." And my brother, he played guitar, so he became very popular as well. And so we were very happy.
Well, I know that you were particularly close to your brother, Heinz. Can you tell us just a little about him?
Well, as I said, my brother was very talented. My grandfather in Vienna, actually, he was a pianist, and not professional, but a very, very good piano player. And he stayed a lot with our grandparents. And he put Heinz, when he was 4 years old, already on his lap. And I showed him how to play piano. And he really took to it. So with 6 years old, he could play already very well piano. And in this apartment in Amsterdam, that was a deserted apartment from a Jewish woman who escaped to Zurich. There was a piano. So he was, of course, extremely happy that he could practice his piano. And I danced. I loved dancing. And so, you know, we had again a very nice family together. And so we were just the four of us. But it was okay. But unfortunately, of course, it didn't last very long.
No, indeed. Well, in 1940, the Germans, of course, they invaded the Netherlands, and obviously everything changed. What happened to the family then?
Well, we came in February 1940 to Amsterdam, and in May already the occupation was. So I didn't really have a lot of good memories of this time. And but nothing really happened. You know, the Germans really wanted to get used to. They wanted to make friends with the Dutch people. So the first, I would say, 3-4 months, life went on as before. But then slowly the measures against the Jewish population started to come out. And it made life not dangerous yet, but a nuisance. We all had bicycles. We had to hand in our bicycles. Then we were not allowed on public transport. We were not allowed to go shopping in Christian shop, only Jewish shops who were not very well provided. So it became quite difficult. And for me as a child, that was the first time that the Disney film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out. And the school talked about nothing else, what happened with this lovely, lovely animation film. And the Jewish children were not allowed to go to the cinema. So we didn't know the music, we didn't know anything. So, you know, it was very, very difficult to lead any normal life. And then slowly people started to disappear. We had to wear a yellow star, and people were arrested, and we never heard from them anymore. Only later, after the war, did we hear that they were sent to Mauthausen, which was a horrific Austrian death camp, and they were just thrown down from the cliff. And the worst thing was then that we had to leave our schools and go to Jewish schools. And then as well, the Nazis came there with trucks, went into different classrooms and told the children, there is a van downstairs, go down. So the children had to go. The parents waited for the children to come home, didn't turn up. They went to the local police, to the Gestapo, didn't get any information. Those children or youngsters were never ever seen again. Only after the war, again we heard they were immediately shipped to Mauthausen and just thrown down from the cliffs. In Mauthausen, there's a big, big monument from all the Dutch youngsters who were murdered there by the Nazis.
When did your family actually go into hiding?
That was after 2 years occupation. So from 40 to 42, things was dangerous, but not yet for most people. And but in June 1942, about 10,000 young people, including my brother Heinz, who was 16 at the time, and Anna's older sister Margot, 16 as well, and many, many of their friends, got a call-up notice that they have to report within a week. They gave a big list what they have to bring, a backpack with so many shoes and underwear and all that, to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. Well, many Jewish parents were very suspicious. In Germany, in 42, already many Jews had been deported. So why should they take more Jews into Germany? So my father called us together and he said, Heinz, you are not going. We are going to go into hiding. And I said, what do you mean hiding? Adults don't hide. And my father explained, I found some wonderful people, mainly they're usually from the Dutch resistance, and they are willing to take us in to keep us safe. But, you know, the apartment's actually very small in Holland because it is a very overpopulated country in a very small land, that the apartments were very small and nobody wanted to and couldn't, I suppose, take in 4 people. So my father explained, I will go with my mother and Heinz will go with him. And I started to cry. I didn't want to be separated again. But this is what happened. And I was 13, and then really, and my father explained, if we are in 2 different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. So I think with 13, that was the first time that I realized I might be killed. And that was, of course, very, very scary. So we separated, we went to different hiding places. And yeah, that was, that, as I said, I was a very active child, and we had to sit still the whole day till the owners who were at work came back. And the Germans were, the news that from the 10,000 who had got called up, perhaps 5,000 hadn't turned up. So, and they really wanted to kill every Jew. They want, especially young people. So they made house searches. So you can imagine, always at night, they knocked on doors, people had to open, had to let them in to search their homes. So in all the hiding places where we were, we had always a hiding place within the hiding place. They made false partitions, sometimes in the wardrobe, sometimes under the floorboard. And so when the knock came, we quickly went there, hoping they wouldn't find us. But of course, the owners of the apartment became nervous. They said, we can't sleep anymore. Every week we are disturbed. You have to look for different hiding places. So in the 2 years that we were hiding, we moved perhaps 6 or 7 times to different addresses. And my father and Heinz the same thing.
Well, in May 1944, you were 15 and your family were betrayed to the Nazis. Can you describe what happened next?
Yes, it was quite a terrible, terrible shock, as you can imagine. My father and brother had just changed hiding place as well, because the woman where they were staying was asking for more money all the time. Well, if you are hiding for 2 years and you don't earn, our money was really running out. So my father said to my mother, they were in the country at the time, and my mother was in Amsterdam. We had more contact with people from the resistance. He said, please get in touch with the people if they can find for us a different hiding place. Because if we run out of money, this woman is going to give us up anyway. So it was already difficult in 44 to find places because many people had been arrested. Many didn't dare to do it anymore. And eventually a Dutch nurse came forward and said she knows a very good house where they can find safe. And so my father and brother went there. And my mother and me, because we looked very Dutch, we occasionally went out to visit them. And this was very near where we were. So we went on a Sunday, and on Tuesday, it was my 15th birthday, and we sat down to breakfast, and there was a knock on the door in the morning. Morning was always safe. And the Nazis stormed in and went straight for my mother and me. And it turned out that this nurse was a double agent. She really worked for the Nazis, but pretended she's a member of the resistance. So we were taken to the Gestapo headquarters, my mother and me, and they took me apart and interrogated me. They beat me up and threatened them they would kill my brother if I don't tell them where we had been, who had helped us with ration cards and all that. And I was in shock. I just couldn't speak because I realized that might be the end of my life, just when I was 15 years old. And so it was terrible, they beat me really quite hard and they threatened me with a gun and all that. But eventually they realized I won't talk. So they threw me in a little room, and there was my mother and Heinz and my father. And my father told me that the Nazis came in with their own key at his house from the nurse and just took them away. And they had followed us very, very sharp, they knew exactly how to catch Jewish people. They followed us when we had visited, so they knew where we were. And so all 4 of us were betrayed and sent to a holding camp in Holland, in the up north.
Where did you go after that camp?
Well, and so we were there, and then of course, on a Friday, transport, they're always going on Friday. They put the transport together to go, but they never told us where to go. We had hope perhaps we have to go to a German factory to work on something because he needed workers, because all the men were in the army. But of course, he never told us where we were going. But it was a terrible, terrible journey. Sure, you have seen pictures of it. What you call it, a cattle truck, or it looks like a container, really. What you see now, where the all kinds of things are transported. There was nothing in it, just a little slit of air on one side, and there were about 80 people in it. And the only good thing was that we were together as a family. That was the last time that we were together. And my father, with tears in his eyes, apologized to us that from now on he can't protect us anymore. That must have been for him as a family man a very, very terrible thing, that he just is powerless to help us. And Heinz, I told you he was a musician, but in hiding, of course, he couldn't make any noise, and certainly not guitar or piano or anything. So my father suggested, let's start painting. And Heinz said, well, I don't know, I'm not a painter. But anyways, they got paints and they started both to paint. And it was amazing what Heinz created. Of course, I had seen some of them because sometimes we went visiting. And but the last conversation I had really with Heinz was that before they escaped from the house where the woman was blackmailing them, they hid the paintings under the floorboard with a note on it. This belongs to Heinz and Erich Geiringer, and after the war, they're going to pick it up again. And he begged me, please, please, if I don't come back, please go and pick up the paintings. And of course, I started to cry. I said, of course you will come. We'll go together. And he said, well, we don't know, but please promise me that you will get the paintings. So I did promise. And indeed, I did get them later. And this is some of the pictures you will see. This at the bottom is one of my favorites because they're all a bit of a favorite with that, because there's a calendar on that wall and it says 11, which was my birthday. So when he did this painting, he was thinking of me. And you can see he used all kinds of details. It was amazing, quite different types of things. And he didn't see anything. He was cooped up in a little room. So that's all fantasy. And when my father started to paint as well, and they did about 30 paintings together. Some were made actually because they didn't always have the material on a piece of a pillowcase, for instance, or just a piece of linen which they could find. And and many years ago, I donated them to the Resistance Museum in Amsterdam so that many people can see the work, because it is no good just having them at home.
Well, these paintings are absolutely wonderful. When the cattle truck eventually came to a stop, where were you?
It stopped at Auschwitz, and we knew about Auschwitz because the BBC sent broadcasts out in all the occupied countries in their own languages, because by 1943, amazingly, the Nazis had occupied the whole of Europe. Only Sweden and Russia, of course, and Switzerland was not included. But all the other countries were occupied by the Nazis, and in all those countries, the Jewish people were picked up and sent to many different camps, but many, of course, to Auschwitz, because that is where there is a gassing. And the BBC always told about, try to avoid to be arrested, because if you're sent to Auschwitz, you would probably be gassed. This was, of course, something so unbelievable that we just didn't want to believe it. We thought perhaps it's propaganda, but it turned out to be really true. So we got to Auschwitz, and the first thing was we had to separate from the menfolk, because it was a huge, huge area of different camps. There was Auschwitz, which is, of course, the best known, which was the men camp, and then was Birkenau, which was the women's camp. So we were separated. You can imagine how this was, saying goodbye to your family, assuming perhaps you will never ever see each other again. So that was, of course, terrible. And so our transport actually was in Birkenau in the women's camp. And so the men walked away. And then the order was to stand in rows of 5. And then Mengele came. Mengele was a man of about 40 years old, a proper medical doctor. But he wasn't there to look after people. But first of all, his first job was to take selection at arrival to see who is going into the camp and who is going to be guests. Can you imagine? There were many in our transport. There were about 600-700 people, with many children, many older people, and all those people were separated from the younger ones, and they were taken immediately to be guests. And then, but of course they didn't tell us, but again, you can imagine a woman who had a baby had to give it to an older woman, and the younger woman had to go one side, and the older woman with the baby had to go somewhere else. And then we were all herded into a huge, huge room. The next thing was I'm dressed completely naked. And the young SS men were laughing at our embarrassment. Then we were registered, and we were told, forget that you're a human being. You get a tattoo number on your arm, and if ever we want you, you're going to be called out by the number. You have no name, forget your name. Then all our hair was shaved. And while this was happening, and this is what they object the most, they didn't have to tell that. They said, laughing, the people you've been separated, your children, your parents, if you go outside, you will smell already, they've been burned already, gassed and burned. You know, the cruelty of those young SS people is just incomprehensible. And then naked, all our clothes were collected, taken away, and then we came out naked, and we passed a big heap of clothes, and we were shown one garment, which could have been a night dress or a winter coat, just one, no underwear. And next was shoes. We were shown 2 shoes, of course, never a pair. And then we were heard that, you know, like cattle, quick, 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 to a barracks, which was wooden barracks, and with bunks, both sides, 3 high, and nothing was on it, just wooden boards. And they said, this is where you will live as long as you live, which won't be long anyway. There was no toilets in those barracks, no water, no refreshing, nothing. And that's where we spent our days when we were not at work. So really more our nights. The food we got was in the evening a chunk of bread, in the morning a little liquid. That was all. And we went to work from early morning to late at night.
I know that with your mother, Fritzi, you were sent to work in the block in Auschwitz that was known as Canada. And what was this?
Yes, that was, I told you, everything that we brought along and our own clothes was all taken to this place called Canada, which was because it was better than anywhere else where you were. So it was kind of a nickname which we had given, the people had given it. And we had to sort out the clothes, and as well, one of the jobs I had to do to open the hems of the garments, because many people had put valuable jewelry or money into the clothes that might perhaps bribe somebody or might help, you know. So that was my job. And you had a break, and you found, of course, a lot of food as well. People took food along. And so that was actually a very, very good job. And we did that for 3 weeks, because at that time, the Hungarian Jews were picked up. And I saw in Canada, there was a road where the new arrival was, and I could see those young people. At that time, there were not many selection. All those young people were just going to go to the gas chamber. I saw that. And I always felt a bit guilty that I was working in this Canada and really helping the Nazis, because all those things were sent to Germany to supply all these goods to the people who had been bombed out. So, you know, that could never have sustained carrying on the war if they would have had all those hoarded things from the Jewish people who had brought everything with them, thinking they will be rehoused somewhere.
Did you ever hear news of your father and your brother?
Well, there were two amazing incidences when I worked in this Canada. We had even a lunch break, and I was sitting on the floor, and I had food because I found food as well in the clothes and everywhere, sitting, eating my lunch. And on the other side of barbed wire fence, I saw some men walking with the striped uniforms. And so I looked, and one of them was my father. Amazing, you know. And so when the guards were not looking, he and me went to, I called him, of course, and we talked a bit, and I asked him how Heinz was. He said he's okay. And because I had known if they were selected or if, but it was, you know, I knew at least they were all right, which was, of course, a great help. And my father said, can you get cigarettes? And I said, but you never smoked, because he was a real health. I didn't drink or smoke or anything like that. I said, you never smoked? He said, yes, but it's a good bargain material. You can get food for that. So, and I did find, of course, cigarettes. I threw them always, and I saw him still 3 days, and then I didn't see him anymore. But it was very good to know at that time that they were still okay.
When did you eventually learn of their fate?
Well, that was much, much later, but I think I will tell about this a bit later when we get to the...
Okay. Well, immediately prior to liberation of the camp, which was by the Russians, did you have any notion that the Allies were actually getting closer?
Well, we had, of course, we didn't even know we knew the season, that it was colder and so on, but we had no idea, you know, about the outside world. They didn't know anything. But in kind of November thing, I mean, it was winter, it was very, very cold. We realized the Germans were not anymore as cruel. They were not doing everything like they done before, beating up people and all that. And many left. So sometimes there was no work, sometimes different, you know, there was A, B, C, and D camp that was all separated with electrified barbed wire. Sometimes the gates between those camps were open, and people from other parts came over, and so it was you realized there was some change was happening, but we had really no idea that it was the Russians, of course, were near. We had no idea about that, but we knew that something is not anymore going as well for the Nazis as it was.
Can you recall your feelings on that Liberation Day?
Well, yes. What happened was that now I know it was January, but at the time I only knew it was winter. That many Nazis disappeared, but taking most of the inmates with them. They really said, we all have to march, and if you stay behind, we are going to burn this whole camp down, and you'll be locked in there and you'll burn to death. So they really wanted everybody to leave. But somehow my mother and me stayed behind. My mother was very, very weak, and she said, I couldn't walk, I will collapse immediately. So, we risked to stay behind. And there were in Birkenau perhaps 500, 700 women left who were all really too ill and too sick to really go with the Nazis. And so that was, of course, very good, because those walking sticks, it's the middle of winter, I don't know, for many miles. So it was called the death marches, because most people perished. And one day we woke up in the morning and all the Nazis had gone, and we were left on our own. We were perhaps a week even on our own. Many people still died. We had hardly any food. There was a little pond outside. We had to hack it to get some water. It was terrible, really. And then one day, the Russians appeared, and not knowing anything about what they were going to find there. So they were very, very cautious. But of course, when they came and realized what it was, they had no idea. And they stayed the night, and they cooked us for themselves, but as well for all inmates. They cooked us a wonderful, greasy cabbage soup, and we just ate and ate and ate. But I've never had a worse night on a bucket, because the food went straight through me. And this morning, many people were dead, because their body couldn't cope with digested food. So we realized we had to be very, very careful. So, and then they left again. So eventually I decided I would go to Auschwitz, the men camp, and see if my father and brother is there. So I left with a young woman, a French woman, and we went to Auschwitz, and the Russians had made their headquarters there. So, and I asked if I can look, but they didn't take any notice of me. But it was, of course, a men's camp. And I looked around everywhere, asking people if they had perhaps seen the father and son and so, and nobody. They were all very, very upset, those people, they looked all terrible. And then I saw a man, and I thought he looks a little bit familiar. And I went to him, and I said, I think I've seen you somewhere. And he said, yes, I'm Otto Frank. I'm his father. And so I just said, and you are Eva Geiringer? I said, yes. And have you seen my father and Heinz? Because he knew them. He said, no, but they've gone with the Nazis. So at that time, I thought that's good news. And I went to fetch my mother, and we stayed there. But eventually the Russian decided it wasn't safe, because in Poland there was fierce fighting, because as you can imagine, the Germans didn't want the Russians to get into Germany. So they held out in Poland as long as possible. So, and they didn't think it was safe for us. And so they transported us eastward. So we traveled from February till May with the Russians who looked after us. There were hundreds of people, even other camps who were liberated were joining, and we ended up in Odessa. And there we waited for the end of the war. And when that came, of course, we realized we had survived. But then, you know, we were still worried. So we are in the middle of Russia. We had no money, we had nothing. How do we ever get back to the West? And that was really we were anxious because we knew that many people had sent to Siberia and what are other Russians going to look after us now or what, you know? But eventually a New Zealand troop transport ship came and we had to register where we wanted to go because they were all nationalities. And we went on this ship and eventually we ended up in Marseille. And from Marseille, we had to stay there quite a while because the bridges over the rivers were not rebuilt yet. So eventually, in June, we got back to Amsterdam. So we were from February till June, we were always on the road, traveling here and there and everywhere. So, you know, quite an amazing story with a lot of adventures. And in Holland, they just dropped us at the station and left us, and that was it. And we had nothing, you know, certainly no money or anything, and we didn't know where to go. And then we decided. My mother said, "Well, there are some friends, a mixed marriage, perhaps they are still there." So we went to them, and we stayed there a few days. But then she said, "You know, you can't stay there." It was a little apartment. And so we said, well, perhaps we can go back to our own apartment because it was furnished. So we did, and it was empty. And the landlady let us go back there. And we waited for news. Every day people came from the station through Germany, through Poland, through whatever. And but no news. We put adverts in the paper. And then I think in July, we got a letter from the Red Cross saying that both my father and Heinz, and they gave the exact name with the birth date, were sent to Mauthausen. And just a few weeks before the Americans came to liberate that camp. So that was, of course, the most horrible news we can imagine. And I didn't want to believe it. I thought if I had survived, my father, who was such a strong person, must have survived. I just didn't believe it. And that made it so very difficult. And I found after my mother died, she had kept it a little note written on the 1st of January 1946 that the life without Heinz and my father is completely useless to me. I really would like to commit suicide. Can you imagine? I survived the camp, but I didn't want to live really after the war without my family. We had lost, of course, many of our family who didn't get visas to get out of Austria.
You were living in the same apartment as the Frank family. How did you get on with Anne at that point?
Well, when we...
I'm going back to a time, you know, earlier time, of course.
Yeah, that goes back, of course, to 1940 when we moved to... Yeah, and you know, we lived on a big open square where if you live in an apartment, you have no garden. So all the children came out to play in this open square. And one day a little girl approached me and introduced herself, very well brought up, and said her name is Anne Frank and she comes from Germany, but she came already in 1933, so she could really speak German. But by that time I could speak a little bit of Dutch, and she took me to her apartment and I met her family, her father, her mother and her older sister. And we became friends after school. We always played out in the street, hopscotch and marbles and cycle tricks and so on. But I was a tomboy, but she was a very sophisticated little girl. She was very interested in her clothes. She always had something else on. There were no uniforms in Holland, so you could choose whatever you wanted to wear. And she was a big chatterbox. She very often had to stay behind in school and write lines. I won't talk so much in class, but she just couldn't help it. She just always wanted to talk, and she wrote already little stories. Actually, it was a book later as well published, but that didn't sell really so much. But you know, she had obviously a talent in storytelling and in writing.
Well, we know, of course, of the tragic fate of the Frank family, and we know that Otto survived. But can you tell us how Otto became such an important part of your life?
Well, when we came back, Otto and we went as well to different people to find out if they had come across our family. And so Otto came to our house as well. He had forgotten that I had met him already in Auschwitz, but he was lonely and my mother was lonely. My mother had problems. She had never worked before. She had to find a living. And Otto came, my mother cooked him a meal and we talked. And, you know, it was so, he tried to, you know, he knew that I knew Anna, so he asked me questions about her and so on. So he came very often. They became friends, my mother and me. And then, of course, one day he came and showed us a diary because Miep Gies, one of the helpers, had found it and waited till Otto came back. Or Anna, she wanted really to give it back to Anna. But when Otto heard that his whole family had died, she gave it to him. And he came to show it to us. So that was, of course, you know, he read a little bit of it, but he always burst into tears. It took him three weeks to read it. And then he copied it all to send to his mother, who lived in Switzerland. And then I remembered, because through all this I had forgotten that Heinz about his paintings. And I asked my mother, we have to go and get those paintings, which we did. And that was, of course, amazing that I found those.
Well, onto you personally, you successfully continued your education and you eventually moved to London to study photography. Now, was this influenced by Otto? Because he was a keen amateur photographer. And we have some pictures here that he's taken.
Yes, Otto was a very, very keen photographer, not of landscapes or anything, but of his children. So there are dozens and dozens of pictures of Anne and Margot, and those were all saved. He must have given it to other people to keep. So this was really a big treasure house he had there. And yeah, so he came to us very often and talked about Anne, of course, and my mother making him a meal, and so they started a new synagogue, the liberal synagogue, and so they were depending on each other. And then, yes, when I finished school, I didn't want to go to school. I was 16. I thought to sit with other children who had not had any experience like that. You know, I felt I was an adult. But Otto insisted that to my mother that she sent me to school, which I did. And when I finished, I didn't know what to do with my life, didn't really care. And Otto decided I should become a photographer. And he gave me his Leica. He said, I have no family. I'm never going to take any more pictures. So I hope you become a good photographer with this very, very good camera.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and I didn't really care. So I said, okay. And Otto knew somebody in London who had a photographic studio. And he got me a place there as an apprentice. So I went for 1 year to London. That was my beginning of the relationship with England.
Okay. Well, speaking of the relationships and speaking of relationships of England, you met somebody very important, didn't you, there?
I was living in a little boarding house where the woman, a refugee as well, had started a little boarding house with tenants with who she gave breakfast and evening meals. And you know, at the time in England, it was difficult to make friends. I knew the people I worked with, but otherwise, you know, I didn't really know anybody. And so there was a young man who had come from Israel to study economics. And so we were both foreigners, and we both didn't have any money. And we got very little money, and we had to pay for the lodging and our food as well at 6. And we went for long walks, and we talked about everything, and but not who we were. He didn't tell me he was a refugee as well, and I didn't tell him I was in Auschwitz. One didn't talk about things like that, you know. And after 6 months, he said to me, Eva, I fall in love with you. Will you marry me, please? And when I finished my studies, we can start a new life in Israel. And I said, no, thank you. And, and he was a bit sad. And I said, well, I have a widowed mother in Holland. And I was, of course, very close to my mother. I couldn't imagine I would marry and go off and leave her alone. I was there only for a year in Holland, and I would go back to Amsterdam. And then Otto, he was very interested in the liberal Jewish community. He came over quite a lot to London, and he visited me then. And I told him this young man had asked me to marry him, but of course I won't because I go back to my mother. And he got a bit embarrassed, and he said, you know, your mother and me have fallen in love as well. And once you get settled, we like to get married. So I went back to this young man and said, you can marry me now. And my mother came over to meet him, and I just tell you a funny little story. And he asked my mother if she agrees that he can marry me. And my mother asked him, well, can you keep a wife? Are you earning enough money? And he said, yes, I'm earning £3 a week. And my mother said, oh, that's good, that's fine, yes. You will be able to keep her very well. Can you imagine? £3 a week was enough to live on.
Yeah.
That was in 1952. We got married, and I didn't want to go to Israel. I'd been already in 4 countries. I didn't want to move, so we stayed in London.
I mean, that is a lovely story. I've got to ask you, like so many Holocaust survivors, for years you suppressed your feelings and you chose not to talk about what you'd been through. What was the watershed that made you change?
Yeah, you know, I had all the time nightmares. It was always me this whole life. But to burden, by the way, I got married and I have 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren now. But, you know, I didn't talk to my daughters about it. not to anybody. It was too painful. I didn't want. It was too painful for me to talk about it, but I as well didn't want to burden them with this terrible history, because they loved me. So why should they know that I suffered so terrible, unbelievable things? So one just didn't talk about it. But that was, of course, not good. The first question I get usually in America is, did you have counseling? But in the 1940s and 50s in Europe, that was not something people did. So you just kept it to yourself. But in 1956, an Anne Frank exhibition came to London for the very first time. And of course, Otto had made a museum out of their house where they were in hiding. And the people working there said, not everybody can come to Amsterdam. But so they made exhibitions to travel to different countries. And London was the first country in the English version of it. And of course, my mother and me, Otto had died already. He died in 1980. And but he was 90 years old. He was 17 years older than my mother, but it didn't matter. I've never seen a happier marriage than those two people had. And and I, by the way, was married for 63 years with my husband. I lost him only a few years ago. And we had a very happy marriage as well. And yeah, so what was I just saying about?
You were just telling us about your marriage to Svi, how long it had lasted, and Otto and your mother Fritzi. But I want to say, I mean, this has been just totally wonderful. But in recognition,
yeah, no, sorry, I lost it. Yeah.
It's okay.
The exhibition came to London, and of course we were invited, my mother and me, and it was Ken Livingstone, where he said he's anti-Semitic, but he organized this exhibition.
Okay.
And as well, he supported the Anne Frank things as well very, very much. So and so there were over 200 people, and he said to me, come and sit with us at the head table. There were some other speakers who were going to talk about the importance of this exhibition. And at the end, he said, and now, Eva, we want to say something to you. I can tell you, I wanted to hide under the table. I was actually a very shy person. When two people were together, I didn't dare to open my mouth. And so suddenly I had to face 200 people, and I really didn't know what to say. And I stood there, sweat was breaking out on my head, but eventually I found that voice, and I couldn't stop. I told them, it didn't make sense, but I told them all kinds of things. And my daughters were there, and they were shocked to hear all this. It was really a revelation. And then this exhibition went all over England, and they always asked me to open it and say something. So I was not a public speaker, of course, and my husband wrote a speech for me, which I read very badly. But eventually I found my voice. And then people said, you have, it's an interesting story. You should really write a book about it. And so I decided I would do that. My mother was still alive, and she helped with it as well. And so my first book, Eva's Story, came out in 1988. And then later, I wrote two more books. One about my brother called The Promise, and the third, that was all I really wanted to write, but then I got permission to write another book called After Auschwitz.
We have pictures on the screen now of your books. Eva, in recognition of devoting your life to Holocaust education, you were awarded an honorary doctorate, and a little later in 2013, you received an MBE.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
We've got a slide coming up here of you with your MBE.
Yes. That was when it was actually not the Queen, but Prince Charles who handed over the beautiful. It's sort of a medal in a box. Very very nice.
Yes, and
For my work.
it certainly looks good on you.
Teaching. I spoke a lot in schools and universities, really, and then I spoke as well internationally, all over the world, really.
I mean, this shows that you can see the interest on the children's faces here, having listened to a story from you. I want to ask you, what do you hope that young people will learn from your discussions?
Well, I hope that we'll have a different attitude to life, because we all know, unfortunately, there's a lot of prejudice against people who are different from yourself. That means color, religion, all kinds of differences. And my husband used to say, very wise, there's only one race, the human race. And you know, there's still anti-Semitism, there's still hatred between different races. We know all this, and not only hatred, but even murders. And you know, this prejudice. This is something which I try to teach children. You know, we are all equal, even with different religions. You know, in schools now they teach children what people eat for different festivals and things like that. So I have great hopes that slowly, slowly, we will realize that we are all equal and should be treated the same way as everybody else.
Right. Well, we know that you fled Austria to escape persecution by the Nazis, but at the very tender young age of 92, you decided to take Austrian citizenship. Tell us of your decision to do this.
Well, I must say it was not an easy decision, because my mother said she would never set foot in Austria. They threw us out, they didn't want us. I'm never going to go back. But I must say, I have been several times in Austria, and it's, you know, it was the one place where I was really, really, really happy. So I did go on holiday with my husband, with the children. Even after my husband was not so well, we still went able to Austria, because I wanted to show him different things. But I loved that Vienna is a beautiful city. And I thought, well, you know, it's different people. It's not the Nazis anymore. And that is, I just tell a tiny little story. I spoke once in Richmond. There is a German school, and I spoke there. And and we had lunch with the children afterwards. And I asked the boy who sat next to me, do you mix with the English population? And he said, well, not really, because our parents know each other, so we usually go make excursions together, and children, we know each other, we go to each other. And he said, the only time we mix with English kids is when we play football. And then he started to cry, but really very, very strong. And I said, did I say something? Did I hurt you? What is the matter? He said, you know, and you still call us the Nazis. And that was the time then when I realized, you know, it's a different generation. Austria is not anymore the terrible Nazis who they were. And there are people now who are sorry about what has happened. And so, and I love the country, really. I love the food. And so why can't I take it as a second? You know, I'm still British, but have Austrian nationality on the side.
We have a picture here of you actually receiving the medal for services to the Republic of Austria.
That was the ambassador. Yes, they did it very nicely. We were able, it was still under the pandemic, of course, and we could invite 30 people, and we had a little lunch, and so all my family came and a lot of friends, and it was really a very, very nice event. And it took then actually another 6 months till we got our passports. But yeah, but I haven't used it, of course, because I haven't been traveling in the meantime. So I hope
You will.
to travel it once when I go to Europe again.
Okay. Well, finally, with ever rising cases of anti-Semitism and other racially aggravated crimes, what is your message to young people today?
Well, this is what I teach, that, you know, that there shouldn't be any this difference between whoever we are, as long as we're decent people. So, you know, color doesn't matter, religion doesn't matter. And, you know, when they're young, I think they agree. But then when they get into life, suddenly they see things, but other people do, and then it's still back again, the racism and the prejudice. But you know, we must not give up. We hope that eventually we will open our eyes and realize that we all human beings all have the same rights in this world, which we have to share. And I think it will happen eventually, but it might still take some time.
Oh, I hope so. Eva Schloss, I have known you, I've known you a very long time. And I've got to say, it has been my privilege and our privilege to have you here as our special guest tonight. You really are an amazing lady and a real inspiration to so many. Thank you from my heart for all what you've done and all what you continue to do.
Well, thank you very much to have organized this, and I'm very glad that it worked today.
Yes, so we.
After yesterday, but it's okay. It's fine now.
Okay. Well, now, if it's okay with you, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to hand back to Dahlia, who will host just a brief session of some Q&A. Is that okay with you?
Okay, that's fine.
So keep well, stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, Eva, thank you, first of all, so much for giving so much of yourself. I know that we're not the first, and we certainly won't be the last to hear your story. And I'm sure it's not easy for you to keep telling it. So thank you for sharing so much of yourself with us tonight. So we have a couple of questions. The first one is somebody's asking, how do you feel when you see the enormous amount of food waste in society today, bearing in mind the terrible starvation that you endured? And are you frugal in your own life?
Oh, very, very much so. The children always say, Mom even squeezes a milk bottle. Milk used to be in bottles. You know, every drop had to come out. And they were not allowed to leave food. What they took on their plate, they had to eat, which wasn't always, I wasn't very popular sometimes. But even now, you know, even if it was a bit old bread and hard bread, I said, well, you know, and even Otto always used to say, hard bread is not hard, no bread, that is hard.
True.
So this is something which definitely people who have been starved really will keep for their life.
Yeah, I think many of us, even those of us who have parents who were here in England, my father was evacuated, and of course there was rationing during the war, and we were never allowed to leave any food behind. Yes, so it is hard to see the amount of waste in the world.
Terrible, really terrible, yes.
It is. There are organizations that are working really hard to make sure that food that would be thrown away is now going to people who need it. So it's good to know.
And there's still so many people, even in England, which is a rich country, who go hungry.
Yeah. Yes, there's no justification. We have enough. We should be able to get it to people. Yeah. We have a question from Sharon in Sweden, and she's asking, do your children and grandchildren live Jewish lives? In Sweden, the second and third generations are talking about the Holocaust in schools. Are your children doing this?
Have your children taught the Holocaust in your children are religious? Oh, religious.
Yes. Are your children religious?
Well, I've got 3 daughters. The oldest married has an Orthodox Jewish man, but but she is not really Orthodox, but she appreciates it, she accepts it. They have a very good marriage, and they have 1 son who is as well Orthodox, and yeah, but also daughter is Jewish, married Jewish as well, and they are they don't keep, they're not Orthodox, but liberal. And I myself belong to the liberal synagogue, and my 3rd daughter is not so interested in any religion. But for me, I'm very proud to be a Jew. I would never give it up. And my father, who was not religious, an uncle who moved to England in the country, and he converted to Anglican, and he said, I will never speak to him anymore. He said, you are born a Jew, you should stay a Jew. So he wasn't religious, but proud of his Jewishness.
Mm. Did your feelings or your relationship with God change?
Definitely. As children, you pray to God to protect you and look after you and things like that. And in Auschwitz, of course, again, many people prayed, and we all actually prayed, but God wasn't there for us. And this is something I came out of the camp definitely an atheist. I said, we are supposed to, I read in Austria, you have to have religious education. And, we are told we are the chosen people, and that God will protect us, but he didn't. I really felt let down. So that was it. But I couldn't get children at first, and that is really what I wanted. But eventually I could. And when I had my first daughter in my arms, I said, well, that is a miracle. And I'm doubting now. I don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet if I should believe in God or not. I think it's a miracle of life. We will never know.
Right. Yeah, there's only one way to find out ultimately, right? And we can wait a little longer.
Yeah.
Alan Sidloff is asking, actually he's sharing some of his own story. He says, my mother survived Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and hardly spoke, as she said that people did not want to hear. She was very patriotic to this country for giving her a chance to work and live. So you'd mentioned yourself that at first you did not think that people would want to hear what had happened to you. How do you feel now? How have people responded to your story?
Oh, they're very interested all over the world. I've been really in practically everywhere, in China, in Japan, in Australia. People, when they invite me, they want to hear. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, and but if it doesn't seem to change their attitude about things, that is really what we're trying to achieve. That is my talks, to people there shouldn't be any religious prejudice or any prejudice. That is really what that people should live in harmony together. That is really the message I have. And hopefully I can influence some people. But, you know, and I think the young people, yes, they all want to do this. But then when they get into life, you know, they get married, becomes difficult, jobs and family and so on, then they become selfish again and things changes.
I hope that they will still teach those lessons to their own children, though.
Yeah, well, we hope so.
We can only hope. Yeah.
There are so many books about Holocaust, which, you know, people are interested. People really want to know, but it's not good enough to read it. They have to take the message, because all those books have a message that it is bad to have prejudice, shouldn't have prejudice.
Yeah. What do you say to people who claim that the Holocaust didn't happen or that it wasn't that serious? What happened?
Well, this is, of course, very, very offensive. And in Austria and Germany, if you deny the Holocaust, you go to prison. And in England and America and other countries, I suppose, it's freedom of speech. But personally, I think it is libel, because it is proven that it happened. You know, 6 billion people disappeared after all, and we know exactly who they are. We have a lot of the names and everything. So, you know, that is a wish. And of course, I worked on a project to get it off Facebook, that they don't publish people who deny the Holocaust. And we have succeeded with that, with the Claims Commission. And yeah, perhaps eventually people will realize that it really was the truth. And people even go to the camp and look at it, and then they still say it's not true. I mean, that's all ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. David Shamash is asking, are you pro-Israel? Some people think that if there had been an Israel, there would not have been a Holocaust. What are your thoughts about that?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. So David is asking, what do you think about the thought that if there had been an Israel, a Jewish state at the time, the Holocaust would not have happened?
Yeah, well, definitely not, because the Jews would have been, if, you know, the rule of Israel is that any Jewish people can go there. They might not have been able, very comfortable to take in all those people, but we have a right to go there, and we would have done it. Of course, we would have done it. We didn't want to be deported into death camps, so they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. We've got one last question, and I'm sure you're exhausted. And so have you spoken to any Islamic groups?
Yes, in school, certainly, to children, definitely. And of course, I get always questions, why do Jewish soldiers, Israeli soldiers kill Palestinians and things like that? And that's, of course, a difficult question. And I said, well, you know, they try to defend themselves, they get attacked, and luckily not so much anymore. But of course, yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into politics. This is, of course, a problem in Israel, that even the Jewish people have prejudice, and they shouldn't. You know, so this is, we should really live in harmony with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, we have more in common than we have that divides us as human beings. I do truly believe that. Eva, thank you so much for giving us 2 nights in a row of your time. I'm so sorry about last night, but thank you so much for coming back to us again tonight.
Lots of people were kind enough to come back again today. And I hope that you will tell your children about it. what I've told, and that we get a better world. It is high time we change everything a bit.
Together, and thanks to the work that you've been doing, I hope that we can achieve that. Thank you not just for tonight, but for all of the work that you've been doing. To answer a question that was sent in regarding whether this is being recorded and how people can view it, Eva's very kindly allowed us to record this. We are going to, you'll need to give us a little bit of time to edit and to make it look nice. And once Eva gives us the go ahead, we will be sharing it on our website. So that, look, we truly believe there's a reason that even though we're a charity, we didn't charge anything for people to join us tonight, because we truly believe that stories like Eva's, stories of survivors, should be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And we wanted to just take any barrier away. So once it's up on our website, please, I encourage you to share it with others, especially younger people who have not been fortunate enough to have personally met survivors themselves. So I will get that on the website as soon as we can. With that said, I want to also thank Morris and Marsha. Marsha, you didn't see on screen. Marsha Selwyn has helped us an enormous amount to get this done. Morris and Marsha have been instrumental parts of a committee that have been working hard to put an entire series of lectures, of guest speakers together. We do have one more event scheduled for a week from today. We are continuing to talk about the Holocaust in the month of January because this is the month of Holocaust Memorial Day. We will be speaking to Heather Morris, who wrote Three Sisters, the story of three sisters who survived the Holocaust together, who also were in Auschwitz and Birkenau. It's an incredible story, and Heather will be joining us from, I believe she is doing a book tour. She'll be joining us from California next week. So you can sign up for that. Those are £5 per ticket. But of course you can share it with the family, whoever's in the room with you. And that money will of course go to children in our youth villages in Israel. That again is available on our website under the events tab. Please stay in touch with us. If you, I will be sending out an email following this, thanking you for joining us. And there will be a link on there if you care to make any further donations. They are always appreciated. Please stay in touch with us. You can sign up to receive emails on our website so that we can let you know of any upcoming events or any news and activities that are going on for us. If you would like to volunteer with us, please get in touch. Any way that you'd like to stay involved, we would love to have you on board to help as many young people as possible. And Eva, you might like to know that our children in our youth villages in Israel do engage in a lot of bridge building, working together and learning together with Arab children, with secular children, with Orthodox and Haredi children. It's a very strong value of our youth villages is to embrace all humanity. So thank you all again for being with us tonight. And my heartfelt thanks to you, Eva. This is a very special evening. So thank you so much.